The Oracle of Luna is a podcast with me, Bridget Engels, as your host. Here we have conversations with real live, present-day goddesses who are actively and courageously doing their magical work in the world. Each episode is a bewitching journey with relevant discussions on topics such as Wiccan pagan spirituality, writing, culture, magical practices, art, ritual, and the craft in its many forms.
Merry meet! Welcome to another episode of the Oracle of Luna podcast. I'm Bridget Engels, your host, and today I am thrilled to chat with Maevius Lynn. Maevius is a writer, artist, international lecturer, ceremonial magician, and her work approaches Thelema as a living tradition from the perspective of a solitary practitioner and an initiate of Ordo, Templi, Orientis, and the Temple of the Silver Star. Her efforts inspire others to make Thelema and magic a purposeful part of their lives. Her new book is The Holy Year of Thelema, a guide to the ritual calendar of Aleister Crowley's tradition by Llewellyn Worldwide. Maevius's work includes YouTube, educational videos, online study groups, workshops and lectures at pagan and occult conferences, magazine articles, books, and art. Welcome, Maevius.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a joy and a pleasure to be on this podcast, and feel free to call me Lynn. That works.
Okay.
And excited to get into all the things I love today. So not only magic, occult, but also what surrounds my upcoming and current book out, which is a very niche tradition known as Thelema.
Yeah, perfect. I am really happy that you're here today. So how's your day going?
Pretty good. How's your day going?
Good. I just got out of the pool, so
that sounds nice.
Really hot here in Vegas, so the pool is necessary.
Oh, I can imagine.
All right. Well, we've got a lot to unpack here. So are you ready to get rolling?
Absolutely.
Okay. Like I always start out my show, I'm just going to ask a pretty basic question. How did your spiritual journey begin with magic, and what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so as I always say, my villain origin story began pretty early on. Back in middle school. So I think important for context was I was always an introverted child and someone who was a big reader. And reading was one of my favorite hobbies to do. And growing up in Florida in a rather conservative area, what was happening was not only the school library was being gutted and books were being banned and removed that were deemed inappropriate, but this was also happening at public libraries. This in combination with coming from, a poor background, I couldn't afford to just go to a store and buy the books I wanted to read. So I really did rely on the school library and the public library as a source of things I wanted to read about.
Yeah.
And the two big subjects I wanted to read about were science, specifically biology. And all the books dealing with evolution were removed, which was, as you can imagine, a lot of books.
Yeah.
And then the other part of this story was books about LGBT. And back then, I didn't have the language to say LGBT,
Yeah.
I was just starting to understand, this idea of queerness and gay and questioning my own gender and sexuality. And I just wanted to read a book with a gay character when I was a kid. I just wanted to know more about that. And also important for context here was the internet wasn't what it is now.
Yeah.
So you couldn't just go online and Google stuff. You really relied on sources like books. And all of that was removed. Even if there was just a gay character in the book, that book was pulled. So there was not a lot of stuff I was interested in reading.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing that was left over were philosophy books. And as a young person, these were quite impenetrable. Nevertheless, I was pretty interested, had nothing else to do really, And so I remember picking up, I think I started with the Existentialist, and I read it, didn't understand it, and I read it again. And I had all the time to do that, just to sort of read these philosophy books and read them again.
That's pretty
And
advanced. How old were you?
oh, I was in middle school about that
Yeah.
age. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, going into high
Good
school.
for
And
you.
so
Good for you. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and anyway, so that eventually led to starting a live journal, as you did, and talking
Mhm.
about this philosophy I became interested in. And so, Sartre, Camus, Heidegger, and all the existentialists naturally led into Nietzsche. And through that pathway, I started to connect with like-minded individuals, which was online, which was a real blessing through websites such as LiveJournal and MySpace at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was through that I got introduced to a broader range of religious thought, including things outside of canonical texts,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and especially the occult. And so I think it was around that time I first called myself an occultist and identified with that. And it was in this general time I first found and came across the name Aleister Crowley. Now, again, at this time, despite being somewhat interested in his work, especially as a queer person myself, trying to understand the world through different philosophies and different
Yeah.
types of religious viewpoints, especially a queer viewpoint. I was very interested in his work. However, there was no way for me to access anything written by him at the time. And so I just sort of put a footnote in reading about him and exploring him.
Yeah.
So, I went to college, I went to grad school, and I didn't pick back up the study of specifically Aleister Crowley and his system of mysticism and magic, known as Thelema, which we're here to talk about today,
Mm-hmm.
until later in life, and specifically the point of corporate burnout. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of people can relate to this, which is going into the corporate world, having to
Mhm.
sort of shelve parts of your identity that
Yeah.
didn't fit in with the corporate work culture. So all of that occult stuff I was very much in the closet about, and I felt I became a husk of a person. I felt very hollowed out by this type of work. It was unfulfilling. I was
What
unhappy.
did you study in college?
So I studied environmental science and specifically
Okay.
soil physics.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so that career path sort of led me all over the place. And soon enough, I found myself working for lawyers, specifically for my scientific knowledge. But
Mm.
that sort of eventually led to me doing, paper pushing sort of
Mm-hmm.
secretarial
Sure.
law
Yeah.
work that was not very fulfilling. It was awful.
Sure. Yeah.
I specifically worked in corporate law.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so I not only was I hollow inside, but I was specifically did not have direction in life.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I know I don't want to be here, but I don't even know what I want. I don't even know where I want to go. And it was at this point I thought to reach into my grab bag of occult tools and sort of like, all right, what kind of, mysticism or occult tools or magic is there that would help me understand myself and give me a sense of myself and a sense of where I want to go in life. And I
Mm-hmm.
remembered Aleister Crowley and his concept of true will. And it
Mm-hmm.
was at this point I was like, I'll just dabble a little bit and explore it. And I did. And you really, with a lot of occult things, especially Thelema, you don't just dabble. You
Yeah.
keep going, you keep going, you keep going, because it's so rich, it's so deep. There's so many layers to pull back, and along those layers were work on myself through the system of mysticism.
Yeah, that makes total
And
sense. So what is Thelema, just for our listeners who are not familiar? I know it's an occult philosophical system of mysticism
Mhm,
developed by Aleister Crowley in the early 1900s with, I guess, Rose Edith Kelly as well. And
mhm.
Thelema is a Greek word for will. I do know that. But other than that, can you just give us some basic knowledge of what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So Thelema is, for some people, depending on who you ask, a religion. It's
Hmm.
a philosophy
Okay.
and or a system of mysticism. And I want to make this very clear because this is something a lot of people get wrong. And a lot of people associate it just because of the aesthetics with
Hmm.
something called Kemeticism, which is the reconstruction of ancient Egyptian religions.
Yeah.
It is not Kemeticism. It is its own thing. It's its own tradition. And another thing I want to emphasize is Thelema is not just a bunch of eclectic things put together by a guy. People are very quick to assume that. They think it's another type of new age spirituality where you just kind of take the parts of things you want. That's not what's happening at all here. So in Thelema, there's a backbone of holy texts that make up the beliefs, the philosophy, or in some cases, depending on who you ask and what it means to them, the religion. So you'll see a lot of similar things, a lot of similar words to things like Christianity, Islam, but they mean something very different. And something also I think is worth mentioning is what is a holy book? And where does that come from? So here's a question for you. Have you ever scribed something or done a channeled work?
Scribed meaning written? Yes, of course. Yeah, I'm an author of 3 books on moon
Oh
goddess
no,
meditation.
I don't mean it like
Oh,
that. I don't mean writing as yourself. Have you ever
oh,
received
yes.
divine words? Yes, okay.
Yes, I know what that's
So
like. Yes.
perfect. So, I guess for listeners who may be unfamiliar with that, so when you're scrying something, when you may be the person, the hand writing the words, or the person holding the
Sure.
paintbrush, but
Hmm.
it is they are not your words. They are not your message. It's a message that flows through you from the divine. And
Right.
what the divine means to you is something very personal, right? And so that could be God. That could be many gods. That could be a spirit. That could be part of your subconscious.
Hmm.
And so when I talk about these holy texts, it was Aleister Crowley's hand, but he was not the voice speaking. So the voice
Right.
of our holy texts are of the divine. And again, there is space in Thelema for each individual practitioner to come to know the divine and what that means to them. So in Thelema, we have people who are polytheists. We have people who are monotheists. We have people who are atheists. Because what that means to them is very personal, and you are encouraged to come to those beliefs on your own.
But what is the main goal of Thelema? I've heard of do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law as the primary kind of philosophy on this. What is the main goal? What's like a
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one you mentioned is a good one to unpack. So this phrase, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," is one
yeah.
of the most commonly misunderstood phrases, but also a good encapsulation of a lot of the philosophy found in Thelema. So this phrase comes from our central sacred holy text, the
Yes.
OG one, known as the Book of the Law or Liber Alvel Legis.
Right, which was channeled by Aleister Crowley, correct?
Correct. So,
Okay.
Aleister Crowley was not the author of that text. Actually, Iwas was.
Okay.
And it is, the divine speaking in those and consist of 3 different chapters,
Mm.
and delivering that divine message. So this phrase, "Do what thou wilt," shall be the whole of the law. This is not talking about doing whatever you want. It is instead talking about coming to understand that innermost spark of divinity within yourself and then aligning yourself with it. So
Ah,
there's this
okay.
idea that all of us as divine beings have this innermost divinity within all of us, and the idea within Thelema is to discover that will, discover that divinity, and then align yourself with it,
Mm.
and also be able to develop the skills to live that truth.
Yeah. We're going to get a little bit more into this, but I do want to ask definitely, can you tell us a little bit about your book, The Holy Year of
Yeah.
Thelema, a guide to the ritual calendar of Aleister Crowley's tradition, and what inspired you to write it, and how does the reader work with your book?
Yeah, absolutely. So my book is something I think everyone from a very basic beginner to someone who's more advanced would want to read, simply because this book, nothing filled this at all. So my book is basically an exploration of the holy days found in this tradition as they were
Okay,
laid out by the holy text.
I see.
And something to kind of understand is there's the classic holidays or holy days, and I'm using holidays and holy days and the same way I'm exchanging the words.
Uh-huh.
um, and for our listeners, feel free to use the term that resonates the most with you. Anyway, there's those classic ones, and then of course modern practitioners have come up with their own personal celebrations. But I really wanted to return to the original parts of the tradition, provide the history, provide the context, as well as connect it to larger ideas from the tradition. And
Mm-hmm.
then once we have sort of that academic establishing of what this stuff means,
Mm-hmm.
then it gets into the practical stuff, what to do about it, and I take it from really basic journal prompts that you can use or mantras. I call them throughout my book in each chapter sparks of inspiration. And that's something if you don't have a lot of time to devote to your practice, you can just do right away.
Mm-hmm.
For people who have a little bit more time, I have something called altar work for each of these holidays where you can sit down at your altar. And I will say this is more pagan in nature, and this is something that comes from my personal practice. And it's just a beautiful way to invite in that seasonal energy, engage with the holiday, and it's a little bit more work,
Mm-hmm.
involving saying some words, lighting a candle, that sort of thing. And
Okay.
then for the people who have a lot more time, there's a full group ritual at the end. Now, I do want to note that if you are a solo practitioner, you're absolutely welcome to adapt these group rituals to solo practice. I think walking through it, on the astral level or whatever, visualization is a beautiful thing you can do as
Mm-hmm.
well. So
Mm-hmm.
this book is really a love letter to practitioners, and I would say just a palette to paint
Yeah.
with.
Oh, that's
This
great.
is, before my book, there wasn't. I say there really wasn't, but there wasn't a book on the holidays, which is very interesting
Yeah.
because I think one of the first books people write about a tradition is about the holidays.
Well, do you think that is because it was more secretive in some ways?
I maybe. I think also I think something to emphasize is just the nature of the fact that this is a very small tradition.
Yeah. Hmm.
There's not many of us.
Or controversial in some ways. I'm not sure when this, early 1900s. Okay.
Yeah, I
Interesting.
mean, I think that's an
Hmm.
important part too. Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Thelema was controversial from its very inception,
Yeah.
mainly because, one of the main voices and founders, Aleister Crowley, is a controversial figure in the
Yeah,
occult for a number
definitely.
of different reasons. But in the Victorian era, they were most disturbed by his, to use modern language, his queerness,
Mm-hmm.
both in gender and sexuality, his
Mm-hmm.
polyamory, and his kink. And these are things we sort of accept now in our modern
Yeah.
society, kind of. It's
Yeah.
not really, but like back then, it was very not okay
Yeah.
in very strict Victorian society. So he was the source of a lot of rumors, a lot of tabloids, a lot of misinformation. And
Hmm.
let's not forget. Um, on a huge important thing happening at this time was World War II.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Or well, World War II didn't start till the 30s, right? So
Correct.
this kind of came about in the 20s,
Yeah,
I
and
believe. Okay.
also the 30s. So let's
Oh,
I just
okay.
want to
Okay.
so the interesting part and I think the only other book that published this, but it's a arrest record. So what happened in Nazi? So first of all, fascist Italy kicked the Thelemites out, but also what happened in Germany, along with all other religious minorities, is the Thelemites were put in concentration camps. And
Ugh.
so,
For being so eccentric or out there.
they just were uncomfortable with
Yeah.
non-Christians, right? So everyone was being rounded up at that time, Freemasons,
Yeah.
other
Sure.
religious minorities, but Thelemites were among them. So,
Huh.
um, not
Huh.
to unpack that whole history, people are more
Yeah,
interested,
I'm just curious about history. Sometimes history dictates what happens in spirituality and art and
yeah.
culture, and so
And I guess
influences.
the point I'm sort of arriving at is, the Thelemites were wiped out in Germany, where that was, the OTO was established, which is one of our main Thelemic organizations today. And the last enclave of sort of Thelemites was actually in California. And so that's where we
Oh,
get Jack Parsons, for people who are familiar with that name. And we kind
okay.
of get that revival in California. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's a really good reason why there's not many of us.
Yeah.
And it
So,
doesn't
as a
help that.
woman, first off, there was a woman named Rose Edith Kelly who helped
Mhm.
shape and influence Thelema. But I was going to ask, as a woman yourself in Thelema, what has your experience been in this tradition? Is it primarily male, or like you said, it's all over the place. Queer, LGBTQ, can embody a lot of different gender type roles. What has your experience been?
Yeah, really positive. I've really enjoyed my time with other Thelemites. I'm initiate of different orders, and that's been great. And I guess the thing I want to really drive home is that Thelema is, from its very inception, women have been a part of that. Women have been a part of the
Yeah.
history, development, and continuation of this tradition. It's important to note, and one of the things that also makes my book very special is, despite women being a part of this the entire time, not so much in mainstream publications. Few women have been published authors in this particular subject. So that makes it very special.
Yeah.
And also, I took care to highlight the voices of women in this tradition, their work. You'll find, excerpts of poetry, you'll find rituals from women, recipes. So you're finding a
Good.
lot of stuff that has never been published before and a perspective that has also never been published before. So it's a
Uh,
very special book, not just
yeah.
on its subject, but who's writing it.
And also, the goddess Nut is part of Thelema. Can you talk a little bit about what goddess Nut's role is in Thelema, and if you is there some kind of way that you embody goddess Nut in your practices?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So, as I hinted at earlier in our conversation, the relationship with the divine is, very personal
Yeah.
to individual practitioners of Thelema, also known as Thelemites. And one of the Nuit makes an appearance in a lot of different holy texts, but the one that's especially relevant to our conversation today is the Book of the Law. She
Hmm.
is the voice of the first chapter,
Okay.
but
Okay.
who or what is Nuit is the question in Thelema.
Yeah.
As we
I know she's an
lay,
Egyptian goddess of the night, correct?
yes, but let's talk about that, right? Because Thelema is not Kemeticism, so
Yeah.
it's not, so what happened, when the Book of the Law was received, it was received during the honeymoon period for Aleister Crowley and his wife Rose Edith Kelly, and they took their honeymoon in Egypt. And for people who work with spirits, for listeners, this is going to be a very familiar concept. And that's when you are channeling a work and the spirits or gods are communicating to you, or a part of your subconscious, whatever your beliefs are. They pick up on symbols and language at hand.
Mm.
And so in the case of this, so not only was Aleister Crowley a previous member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, so the symbol set he learned when it came to magic was this Golden Dawn
Yeah.
type symbol set,
Right.
but
Right.
he was also physically in Egypt. And
Ah,
so a lot of the symbols and
okay.
language are not only passed through what
I
I
see.
consider to be the Aleister Crowley filter, but they are also what he was surrounded with.
Interesting.
And so I just want to put the idea
Yeah.
out there. If
Yeah.
they had taken their honeymoon, say, in another part of the
Sure.
country, this book perhaps would look very different. And I want to also point out, our holy books are not another dogma by which to conform your life to. They are instead an invitation to explore yourself, the nature of the divine, and what that means to you. So I'm not
Hmm.
here to tell people what to think about these books, but in
Hmm.
my particular book, when I explore these questions of who or what is Nuit, what is the Book of the Law, I lay out a whole buffet of ideas to kind of sit with and think about.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
make sure to include everything from an atheistic perspective all the way to a polytheistic perspective.
How does Goddess Newt fit into Thelema?
Yeah, so she is considered to be the infinite, and
Okay.
uniting with a singular instance and point known as Hadit. So when we, again, bringing it back to what we were just talking about, ancient Egyptian religion, obviously the goddess Nuit in ancient Egyptian, she had a husband Geb, had several children with him, and in our essential sacred holy text, the Book of the Law, Geb's not in it.
Mm-hmm.
Her children are not mentioned. Instead, she is uniting with this Hadit to produce one child. Now, is it possible Nuit over time went through a cosmic divorce and disowned her children? I'm going to leave that up to the listener. That's up to you, and how you interpret this text. However, you can also look at it as this is an entirely different spirit. This is an entirely different manifestation of the divine, using symbols of convenience to communicate a more universal message for humankind. In the case of Nuit, she represents in Thelema the infinite possibilities.
Okay.
And she's uniting with Hadit, who represents a single instance. And as incarnate beings here on Earth, in order to experience anything at all in linear time, we have to experience that in a single moment, right? And so that's sort of what that comes about. So your question is, do I embody Nuit? And my answer would be no. I try my best to embody myself as a divine being and sort of what that means. But there are beautiful instances of other women along this path, and other practitioners, male, female, all shapes, genders of people, who do, invocations of Nuit to explore what that feels like. A beautiful example of that is in the Gnostic Mass, where the priestess does an invocation of Nuit. So I have never performed as priestess in the Gnostic Mass, so I can't say yes to that, but it is something that's done.
What does a typical Thelemic ritual look like, or Gnostic Mass? Is there like some kind of general structure? What is entailed?
Yeah, absolutely. There's all kinds of beautiful ones to explore. I want to prime everyone today with one that you can start using right away.
Okay.
It's also in my book. There's a lot of different ones you can start with. Banishing rituals, more advanced ones. But one of them I like to do is something called saying will, and that's done before eating the main meal of the day. And people compare it to saying grace. It is not saying grace, but it's just a beautiful little thing where you say some words before you eat the main meal of the day, and that brings some extra mindfulness into the eating, and it also allows you consuming these calories to transmute that into spiritual substance.
Nice. All right. One of the things I was going to bring up is the holy days of Thelema in comparison to Wiccan Pagan Wheel of the Year or Sabbats. Do they kind of compare to Wiccan Pagan Sabbats or rituals as far as the timing goes?
Yeah. So yeah, and there are some similarities, some differences. This main similarity is between the classic spokes of the wheel people would associate with the Wheel of the Year, like in Wicca, for example. In Thelema, the Book of the Law is where I'm getting this from, and it calls for the celebration of the solstices and equinoxes.
Okay.
Now, it is very important to note that, for example, the winter solstice in Thelema is just the winter solstice according to our holy book. It is not Yule. So these extra meanings that were popularized by the founder of Wicca, Gerald Gardner, are not present in Thelema.
Sure.
Because these holy books predated Gerald Gardner.
Yeah.
And another thing is the cross quarters are not present in our holy days. And in addition, another difference there are some holy days that are unique to Thelema. This includes the 3 days of the writing of the Book of the Law, for example, as well as the first night of the prophet and his bride. So I think what's really cool about this is for people who are like, hey, I'm building my own tradition, I'm exploring holidays and what that means to me. Here's a different tradition. Here's a different perspective on not only the seasons of the year, but also the seasons of your life from birth to puberty to death. So
I love that.
Yeah. And in our holy book, the Book of the Law, calls for that, which I unpack and explore in my book.
Yeah.
And so, I just encourage people, especially people who want to dip and dabble and like, hey, what else is there to celebrate throughout the year and a different perspective? I think this tradition is an interesting one. And I do encourage people to explore, try things on, because Thelema is not a closed tradition. You don't have to be born into it. You can just try out our magic and see how that feels.
All right. Well, we're running out of time, but I do want to ask, what is your website and social media so that our listeners can find more about you, your books, and your magical offerings?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to connect with people. My website is maeviuslynn.com. And if you're looking for practical demonstrations of ritual and some great video information, check out my YouTube channel, Maevius Lynn, and check out my book, The Holy Year of Thelema. Also, I'm all over social media, Maevius Lynn. You can find me Instagram, Threads, blue sky. Those are the main
Perfect.
ones.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'm going to set aside a few minutes here at the very end for Maevius to give us I believe, a prayer or invocation for just a couple minutes here. So take it away.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I'm going to give everyone this excerpt from the deacon's speech in the Gnostic Mass that I find really beautiful, so I hope you all enjoy. Lord visible and sensible, of whom this earth is but a frozen spark, turning about thee with diurnal and annual motion, source of light, source of life, let thy perpetual radiance hearken us to continual labor and enjoyment, so that as we are constant partakers of thy bounty, we may in our particular orbit give out light and life, sustenance and joy to them that revolve about us without diminution of substance or effulgence forever. So mote it be.
So mote it be. Thank you so much, Maevius, for coming on the show and chatting about your book and Thelema and giving us some information and inspiration to explore further Thelema
Absolutely.
and read your amazing book. I've really enjoyed chatting with you today.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for the joy and pleasure of coming on this podcast. And I hope people check out something new and check out my book.
Me too. Thanks to all our listeners for joining us here today. So until next time, bye-bye.